In this video we are going to study a very instructive game in which we will see how Black can take advantage of the potential of his position in the Sveshnikov variation of the Sicilian defense. The game began with the moves e4, c5 the Sicilian defense. White played knight f3, developing his king's knight and taking control of the d4 square, with the idea of occupying the center with his pawns on the next move. Black answered knight c6, developing his queen's knight and increasing control over the d4 square. The game continued d4. C takes d4. Knight takes d4. Knight f6, attacking the e4 pawn. White answered knight c3, to defend the pawn. Now, Black played e5, entering the Sveshnikov variation. White played knight d to b5, threatening to invade with the knight on the d6 square. Black played d6. White played bishop g5, developing the queen's bishop and pinning the f6 knight, with the idea of taking control of the d5 square. Black played a6, to force the enemy knight to retreat. After knight a3, Black played b5, threatening to advance with b4, which would win a piece. The game continued bishop takes f6. G takes f6. Knight d5, centralizing the knight and avoiding the opponent's threat. Now, Black played f5, attacking the opponent's central pawn, with the idea of removing support from the opponent's knight and weakening its control over the d5 square. White played c3, freeing the c2 square to be able to bring the a3 knight closer to the center, since it is very passive on the edge of the board. Black played bishop g7, developing the king's bishop and preparing to castle. The game continued e takes f5. Bishop takes f5. Knight c2. Black castled. Knight c to e3. Bishop e6. White now played bishop d3, completing the development of his minor pieces and preparing to castle. Black played f5, beginning to advance his kingside pawns and increasing his control over the central squares. White castled. Black played rook a7, with the idea of moving the rook towards the kingside to incorporate it into the attack in that area. White played a4, attacking the b5 pawn, with the idea of creating weaknesses on the opponent's queenside and opening the a-file for his rook. Black responded knight e7, threatening to capture the white knight on d5, which is a very strong piece. The game continued knight takes e7. And after rook takes e7. A takes b5. A takes b5. Bishop takes b5. White has gained a pawn but has lost control over the d5 square. Black played d5, advancing with his backward pawn. Black retains the bishop pair and has a central mass of pawns, which offers him good compensation for the lost pawn. He can continue with moves like f4, to force the white knight to retreat. Then he can continue with f3 and he has a very good game. Now, it would be a mistake the move f4. Trying to stop the advance of the black pawns, because after e takes f4. Rook takes f4. Black can play bishop h6. And after rook f3. Black plays queen b6 and wins. In the game, White played knight c2, retreating the knight to a safer square and anticipating the attack of the opposing pawns. Black played rook b7 attacking the opposing bishop and pressing along the b-file. White played bishop c6. And now it was possible to capture the b2 pawn, so Black would recover the pawn and have the advantage. In the game, however, Black played rook b6. White answered knight b4, defending the bishop and blocking the b-file, to defend the b2 pawn. At the same time, White increases the pressure against the d5 pawn. Black played d4, advancing with his pawn and attacking against the c3 pawn, which is the support of the opponent's knight. White cannot capture on d4 because he would lose his knight. White played rook a7, invading with his rook on the 7th rank. Black played e4, advancing his central pawns and gaining even more space. At the same time, this move releases the action to the bishop on g7. White played queen h5, moving his queen to attack on the kingside. Now, it would not be possible to capture on c3, to recover the pawn because white would checkmate the black king. In the game, black advanced his pawn to d3, obtaining a passed and protected pawn. White played rook d1, putting his king's rook into play, which was the last piece left to enter the fight. Black played king h8, freeing the g8 square for the rook, with the idea of preparing the attack along the g-file against the enemy king. Now, white played g4, attacking against the f5 pawn, with the idea of breaking the opponent's pawn chain. Black responded with bishop b3, attacking against the enemy's rook. After rook d2, black played queen d6, creating the double threat rook takes c6 and queen f4. Black is winning. The game continued. G takes f5. Rook takes c6. Knight takes c6. Queen takes c6. And now white played rook takes g7, desperately sacrificing the rook. But black played king takes g7. White played f3, with the idea of incorporating the rook into the attack. Black simply played king h8, placing his king on a safer square and freeing up the g-file for the rook. Black has a decisive advantage. White played queen h4. Black responded queen b6 check. And after king f1, black played rook g8, threatening to give checkmate. The game continued. Rook g2. And after rook takes g2, king takes g2. E takes f3 check. If white now captures black's pawn, black can advance with d2 to promote his pawn and wins. In the game, white played king h3. Black played d2, threatening to promote his pawn. The game continued. Queen f4. Black promoted his pawn. Queen e5 check. King g8. Queen e8 check. King g7. Queen e7 check. Bishop f7 and white finally resigned. Since in case of queen g5 check, black simply answers king f8, white has no more checks and black wins.